Hello, everyone. Good day after Election Day 2025. I'm Hannah Thibedeau. Welcome to Insight to Impact. This is a global public affairs exclusive webinar series. So we thought, oh yeah, we stayed up late last night to get the crazy results of the election campaign. Let me give you the results right now, and I'm going to get to our colleagues around here. At this point in time, and things could change, we do have a Liberal minority government. That is Prime Minister Mark Carney. He will be sworn in as Prime Minister. Liberals have 168 seats, the Conservatives 144, the Bloc Québécois have 23, the NDP 7, and the Green 1. So yes, it's a Liberal minority government. It will be a Prime Minister Carney government. Also, we have the Conservatives, the official opposition in this place. However, without an official opposition leader, because the leader actually lost his seat in Carleton last night. And then with the NDP, they have lost official party status. You need 12 seats in order to hold official party status in Parliament. They got 7, and their leader stepped down as of last night. So let me bring in our gang to dig into all of this for you. Also, a reminder, if you have questions, please type them in. We will get them to our people there. You can see Ali's put that up for you. But I'm going to start with our CEO first, Randy Pettipas, with some opening comments for everyone who's watching. And thank you for watching.
Thank you very much, Hannah, and let me add my thanks to everyone that's tuned in. We've got, I think we probably have a record number of one of these Insight to Impact sessions, as I would expect on the day after an election, but particularly with these results. It was quite a roller coaster over the last number of weeks, and certainly even through the hours of last night. And for those, some of you on the watching this may have been in Calgary and may have been at our event and experience some of those emotions, depending on, no matter who you were cheering for, you had quite a few ups and downs, and Hannah's gone through kind of where the numbers landed in the end. And I'll talk some more about that later. I did want to just grab an opportunity to not only thank everyone for tuning into this, but to the team at Global. Hannah said that they were working late into the night. I know that some worked through the night to be able to get a note out this morning to our clients. We've spent a lot of time, quite frankly, through the entire campaign. We have people here from all the different parties. We have policy experts. We have done our best to be able to get behind the numbers, not just the horse race, but what does it really mean? And we can talk about more of that today. I also want to do a shout out to, and I know sort of the team here are going to all introduce themselves, but Brenden from MQO Research.
Show us Brenden there, Ali.
Let's see, Brenden.
There we go.
For those that clients now that were receiving our updates would have been seeing a lot of the numbers that we commissioned through Brenden, and it ends up that he was pretty accurate and provided for lots of things to talk about and lots of debate through the campaign. So thank you to not just everyone on the screen, but to everyone on the team for all the work through this. I'll go back to you, Hannah.
Okay, thank you, Randy. We're going to get right into this because we do only have an hour and it goes by fast. I see questions are already coming in, but I have a question for everyone first. And if you can just give a quick introduction so everybody who's watching knows who you are. We all know who you are. Rick Roth, I'm going to start with you. This question goes to everybody. What was your reaction instantaneously to what you saw this morning when we woke up?
Yeah, so I went to bed at about 1 a.m. and I think the question about Pierre and his own riding was more or less cemented. But I'd say I think the margin has kind of increased a little bit. One of the things Pierre said in his speech was, they had kept the Liberals and the NDP from possibly having a majority, and I think that's kind of cemented almost on the other side in the morning, where the two of them together, if they had a similar kind of arrangement that they had last time in the House of Commons, could more or less pass legislation through at their leisure.
So, Brenden, I'm going to come to you because, as Randy was saying, you've been watching the numbers the whole time. What surprised you the most?
Well, I mean, maybe I'll answer your first question first. When I woke up, really what I said to myself was, there it is. There's that 44% for the Liberals, roughly, that we were expecting. We've had them at that almost frustratingly every single week since the beginning of this election, and they finally got there. So What surprised me, I think, is how surprised a lot of folks were when earlier results came in and the Liberals were more down than expected, when we knew that the advanced polling was likely to break their way, and it did.
And we're going to dig into that polling a little bit because Brenden has some great numbers for us. Leila, I'm going to come to you next. What'd you wake up thinking?
Yeah, thanks, Hannah. I think for those who don't know, I'm the resident New Democrat here in Victoria. And so waking up this morning to the news on Vancouver Island, things felt pretty bittersweet. A lot of folks who I had supported and spent time door knocking with did not win their ridings. So that was upsetting, I think, a little bit. And the party, I think, writ large, is facing some really important questions about its future, which I'm looking forward to discussing with everyone.
Yeah, really, we have to remember there are a lot of humans behind those faces who are the political leaders and the teams as well. So, Randy, coming back to you, what did you wake up thinking this morning?
I woke up thinking that, and I will admit to having been up very late, so I woke up with the same numbers that were out there as when I went to bed. But Hannah, I just want to touch on through the night.
Sure.
There were some different scenarios that, my gut was going up and down as you saw, who was actually going to be prime minister. Maybe it was a far out there theory, but there was a time in the night that you could have seen Mr. Poilievre doing some kind of deal with the Bloc to be able to become prime minister. I think that all of those scenarios through the night were creating turmoil for a lot of people.
Mm-hmm.
But to get to your question, I know you told us all to keep it tight, and I think you meant me, but I will.
You're the boss.
I will keep it tight. This morning when I woke up, I thought, you know what, this actually, and this is not a party specific comment, but it's a fairly stable, to Rick's point, it's a very stable, almost majority government that came out of this, for good or for bad. But I think the ups and downs have pretty well ended.
Yeah, there are about 11 seats that are still up in the air. Brenden, can you jump into this one a little bit? And they would need, they being the Liberals, would need 4 in order to get a majority government. However, in that 11, they're also teetering and losing some too. Do you want to dig into that for us?
Yeah, no, it's really down to the wire. I mean, who would have thought that, we would wake up this morning and whether the NDP or the Liberals are up by 35, 40 votes and none of it might be one of the potential deciding factors today. And that's where we are. Of course, taking nothing away from none of it, all to say is that when we were talking yesterday, I had said reasonably confidently that we'll kind of know what's going to happen by Ontario. Well, I guess we did. We knew what wasn't going to happen by Ontario. We weren't going to get that sort of obvious Liberal majority, and now we wait for the final poll in a few different ridings.
So, Rick, coming back to you, one of the questions, and we've all been talking about it this morning, is will Pierre Poilievre stay on? He actually won larger popular vote, more seats, but lost his own seat in Carleton.
Yeah, I mean, I would have said this morning, if he had won a seat, that there would be no question on whether or not he should stay on as leader. Yeah. I still think it's probably the case. Like, I think a lot of emotion is being driven out of him losing a seat. It's obviously a hit at the party. It's a hit at him. But I think he's built I'd say a strong foundation that he's hoping he can lead into the next election. He's got a caucus that is aligned with him, and I say that less so from the ideological side and more from everybody in that caucus has increased their margins this election, compared to previous years. So they're not going to be sitting there and wondering, would I perform better with a different leader? Is my seat at risk if we dip in the polls? And then the last thing I'd say is I think he's tapped on a new voting coalition. Gone are the days of the Conservatives thinking that they need a very strong NDP in order to split enough votes to win some of those key ridings, especially in Ontario. They performed very well in those ridings on their own without the NDP split. Almost took Hamilton Mountain, very competitive along the Kitchener-Waterloo corridor, where normally they would need a strong NDP to jump through. So I think he's got a good foundation, but there's obviously going to be questions that he's going to have to manage.
Before I want to come to you, Leila, because there's a great question here about would any NDP cross the floor. But Brenden, just before I do, on those numbers, that was something you found surprising. Something that we actually wrote about is that the fact that the tanking of the NDP vote didn't, in fact, all go to the Liberals.
Yeah, let's bring up my screen here real quick to our producer. So these are the results and our projection. Now a little bit has changed already, but this is from this morning when 99.1 I think percent of polls were reporting. But you'll see here kind of the thick bar. For the parties on the left is what we had projected the votes likely to be going into the election, and then the other bar, the lighter bar on the side there is what the result is at that point. And we could see that Liberals pretty close, kind of in that 44 range like we might expect. However, the Conservatives 3.2. Well, look at what number is close to that, and it is this NDP number, which is roughly 3 as well. Conventional wisdom is if this is like this, it goes over here, but it looks like it went here. So all bets were off when it comes to where that share went.
Yeah, those are fascinating numbers. So, Leila, coming to you now, and this is a question from Beth Kidd. So if you can put that up. There we go. Thank you, Ali. Beth Kidd asks, what is known about the NDP MPs who were elected? And do you think any will consider crossing the floor to give the Liberals a majority? I think that's a great question because it did run through our minds this morning.
Absolutely. Yeah, thank you, Beth, for the questions. So in terms of the NDP MPs who were elected, many of them were incumbents and they held their ridings predominantly in BC and in Western Canada. I think we saw, Rick has talked a little bit about the Conservatives in Ontario, and we did see all the MPs in that part of the country lose their seats. So the NDP MPs being incumbents, I think tells us that they are very unlikely to cross the floor. I think that if anything, they will be having some internal discussions regarding the potential for some sort of agreement, perhaps not as formal as the one that we saw in the last parliament, but a looser agreement to support the minority Liberal government on confidence matters. But I think the likelihood of a floor crossing at this point in time is quite unlikely.
So that is something we're definitely going to watch for because everybody knows about the supply and confidence agreement that was between the Liberals and the NDP in the last parliament. There have been coalition governments in the past, so I am sure there are some types of discussions going on behind the scenes. So Leila, thank you for that. Randy, I want to ask you this, and this is a good question, and I can dig in a bit on it too. This is from Anita Perry. Who are the non-politicians likely to be in Carney's backroom team? It's fascinating. We don't have 100% confirmation, but do you want to start? And then I can tell a couple that I know too.
Sure. Look, Anita, first off, we don't know. These are very, very personal decisions for the Prime Minister that he'll have to look at making. Do you take your campaign team essentially inside to be on the governing side? Do you not? Do you take some of them? My guess is that he will consult with a few people, but not many. It's a decision he has to make, and I think that it remains to be seen who he decides to come in to kind of run the show, who comes in to do caucus liaison, and all the different. He may even change the structure of PMO. Who knows? Those are all things he needs to drill into very quickly, though, and people are going to be looking. I would argue, Anita, just as much as they're going to be looking at, who's going to be cabinet and those kinds of things, there's going to be a huge interest in who's going to be in the quote unquote inner circle.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to throw some names out there, Randy, and you can quash them down or others can as well. But some of the people who were on that election team with him, his chief of staff, I am curious as to whether Marco Mendicino will continue in that role. I did have a chance to talk to him recently. He said if he was asked, he would surely consider staying on. But that one would be interesting because that's one of the biggest roles in the Prime Minister's office. Janice Charette was on the election campaign. Randy, you know a bit more about Ms. Charette than I would. whether she would stick around from behind the scenes. And then Jerry Butts, who was also the principal secretary to Justin Trudeau for the first part of his administration. I'm curious as to whether he would stick around. But those are names of people who were in that inner circle during the election campaign. Does anyone have any insights on those that they want to bring in?
I would just say Janice Shred is obviously a very accomplished public servant, very smart person. I met her numerous times. I'm not going to claim to know her personally, but she's playing a big role in transition, is my understanding. So she'll play a role on who are the cabinet ministers, any reorganization of government, those kinds of things. So, but does that mean she's there for the next 2 months or the next 2 years? I don't know, but I think that he does have some very accomplished people around him, and she is definitely one of them.
Yeah, absolutely. These are things that we all keep an eye on. This is a great question, and this is one I woke up thinking about this morning. This is from Richard Foote. Without a clear majority, but they're close to a majority, and with uncertain environment of a minority parliament hanging over our government, will Canada be able to negotiate from a position of strength and unity with the Trump administration? Rick, I want to go to you on this one because you were involved in a lot of negotiations under the Harper government. How do you see this working?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think I've been involved in anything quite like a negotiation under this administration. Yeah, I mean, I think that's the $1 million question. It's obviously a stronger mandate than I would have anticipated earlier on in the night. I think that helps the Carney government deal with the Americans. There's obviously going to be some alignment within the parties, and obviously the government prior to the election and the government after will probably spend a lot more time managing relationships with the provinces who have been disruptive at times and supportive at other times. So I think there's enough pieces there for him to cobble together a bit of a negotiating mandate and a strong focus to resolving the tariff issue with the Americans.
Yeah, and if you didn't happen to see this morning, Bloc leader Yves-François Blanchet, who's the only main opposition leader to have kept his seat in the Canadian Parliament, had this to say this morning, which is interesting because they have 23 seats, still down though. How many, Brenden? Percentage points while you're looking for that. One thing he said about the Canada-US tariff is that if we're patient enough, we will prevail in that negotiation. But he also said the best way for us to achieve that is through an alliance. He is saying that this government needs to survive for at least a year. Brenden, how many did the Bloc go down?
I've got.
Sorry. Yep. Jump in when you find that. Randy, go ahead.
Just while Brendan's looking for that, Hannah, I just want to make a quick comment as a follow-up to Rick's.
Sure.
There was a lot through the campaign, because it's a campaign. You had criticisms of how one leader may be handling kind of the U.S. situation, dealing with Trump, how others would do it differently and better. But it is really important to remember the campaign's over. It ended. And I think that there is a strong feeling of unity from all the parties. And I hadn't seen Mr. Blanchet's comments, but I don't think we're going to be seeing there's going to be political sparring on lots of things. I don't think it's going to be over how do we deal with Mr. Trump.
Yeah, I hope we can all agree to that. Leila, do you want to jump in on that one too?
Yeah, I think I was interested in the comment I think that Rick made regarding the relationship with the provinces. I think now that the campaign has ended, the new prime minister will have an excellent opportunity to build some of those alliances. I think there's some that we saw naturally evolving before the campaign, but there's a couple of other provinces I think that it'll be interesting to see how those dynamics shake out and whether the prime minister will be able to have the provinces truly behind him as he begins to negotiate with the Trump administration.
Yeah, let's go to that a little bit. And Brenden, I'm sorry if I'm throwing
No,
things
that's
at
all right.
you.
That's fine. I had my projections up versus the result, and I 2021 so far in the past, I didn't even have it thought about. I mean, they only dropped a point nationally, but what really ended up happening there was a drop from 35 seats to something like 23.
Yes.
So pretty substantial.
Yeah, pretty substantial drop there. Maybe you can give us a sense, and I'm sorry if I've gotten you off your pages there.
Not a bit. I'm here.
Yeah, we just roll like this, Brenden. So when you look at the regional breakdown, what does that say to you about how difficult this could potentially be for Mark Carney to manage this government? And then we'll go through everybody on that.
Absolutely. And maybe we'll bring up my screen here again, please. Not as bad as you might have expected, frankly. So, it's interesting. We were in a situation where the Conservatives and the Liberals both performed relatively better than they kind of have almost ever, yet everybody felt like they lost. And that is just the way that split. I don't think our country is used to, I'm certainly not, a two-party horse race between parties. And that's why the dynamic felt so weird all night long. So what we're looking at here is Quebec, and we were projecting 47% for the Liberals. It came down to only 42.5. The Conservatives picked up a little bit of a point. The NDP down a little bit, but really the Bloc did end up doing a little bit better than we expected. Well, let's go and take a look at what we might all be worried about, which is a place like Alberta. Well, in Alberta, just writ large, kind of as expected. So the Liberals, 28%, not actually too bad. Looking at 2 seats out of Alberta, which, certainly has been worse, could be worse. Conservatives, a little bit of overperformance. However, if we look at the areas within the province. So if we look in the rural areas, we see a little bit more pickup here for the Conservatives, 3.3. But look at the suburban area. This is how the Liberals managed to get anything done in Alberta, I think, was we had them at something like 20 points, which pretty good, and they overperformed that by 4 points. And we kind of see this tit for tat that happens all around the country in all different kinds of regions where really the Liberals and the Conservatives perform pretty well. I think if you're a Liberal Party prime minister, you look at the kinds of proportions of votes that you're getting in the prairies and you're saying that looks great. So there's a sort of a ghost mandate that exists across the country, even if it didn't necessarily result in seats everywhere.
Randy, why don't you dig into some of those splits for us and what your thoughts were on what Brenden just showed us?
Well, I think the challenge for not only this government, for all governments, for provincial governments in the country, and you could argue on the continent, is the urban-suburban rural split in votes. And I think some of that, and Rick may have a better sense, I think some of that changed last night. There were some 905 ridings that the Conservatives got, to your earlier point, Rick, that weren't necessarily expected. But I'm not sure that's a real breakthrough in terms of the overall urban/suburban rural split. And I think that there's a seat, the seat implications for that, obviously, with cities having far more seats because of the population. But more importantly, I would say the public policy process when you're looking at very different needs, very different issues between those communities are a real challenge. And, if you take the prime minister at his word, who says, I'm going to govern for everybody, no matter who they voted for, well, that means rural Canada. And I think that it's going to remain to be seen if, from a public policy perspective, does that come into play versus the hardcore politics of we know where our votes are and that's who we're going to cater to.
I want Rick and Leila to dig into that too. Leila, you first, please.
Yeah, thanks, Hannah. I think in terms of how we saw the votes start to split out from the data that Brenden was running through earlier, it was really fascinating to see how that played out in British Columbia. When you look at a map of what the electoral breakout looked like before the election compared to what it looks like now, we saw the Liberals really pick up a lot of NDP support in cities. And even in the riding that I'm in, Victoria, right now, it was held by the NDP for almost 20 years, and it's now being held by a Liberal MP elect. And then on the flip side, the Conservatives were very effective in picking up that NDP support in rural areas, both here on Vancouver Island as well as in the interior. And so it's it's very fascinating to see those dynamics. And I think to what Randy was saying, it will be really interesting to see how the new government chooses to govern and how they'll represent those new voices in Parliament.
Rick?
Just to back that
Oh,
up.
sorry. Go ahead, Brenden.
I'm just saying to back that up, I'll maybe share a screen here as well as
Yes,
I bring
please.
up BC. And so, well, here's the urban BC projected Liberal 35. Look at what they did. They way outperformed that 47%. Conservatives underperformed our projection, and then the NDP kind of held. Well, it was not going to be an excellent result anyway, but they sort of held there. This is urban. Well, let's just flip just a little bit outside of there and go to suburban. Liberals, pretty well held steady. Look at the NDP and the Conservative. That's where the flip went. Very decisive move from NDP to Conservative in the suburban BC area.
Fascinating. Okay, Rick, your turn to dig into this.
Yeah, no, I look at it from the Ontario perspective as one of the questions earlier in the chat. I think the Conservatives are always kind of looking to make inroads into the GTA. Well, in order to do that, you need to speak to a very different voting base. I think they had some success. Maybe not to the extent that they would have liked to. The Mississaugas, stayed relatively liberal. I think we picked up one Oakville seat. So small inroads. But I think, to Carney's credit too, they picked up some rural seats that I didn't think were necessarily in play. One in Quinte West, I believe.
They did?
MP Ryan Williams went down there. So yeah, I think we're seeing a little bit of a realignment. We're seeing it not just in age demographics, which I find very interesting, because again, it kind of goes against what I remember from the Harper years of its kind of core support. Like it's changed quite a bit. I think it's a good base for both parties to explore to make further inroads in the next election.
Brenden, is there anything you wanted to point out in Ontario, just following up from what Rick was saying? And then that was a great question. I want to point it out to Nikki McDonald. Question was, in Ontario, we saw interesting results where the Liberals took some new ridings, such as Peterborough, lost some key ridings in the 905. What do those results say about support for Carney? How does it juxtapose against the recent Ford election results? Brenden, did you have something that you wanted to tell us about that too? I can see him nodding. He's great at these numbers. I'm a journalist.
Hey, I love me a number.
Numbers.
That's it,
I'm happy I'm not Brenden today, Hannah.
Yeah,
It's been
exactly.
pretty rough on him.
So happy you're here.
We've been living and breathing this together, friends.
Love it.
Let's bring the board up. There it is. So, we expected there was going to be a strong night for the Liberals in Ontario, and there was, almost exactly as expected. What wasn't expected was what the Conservatives were going to do. Again, we thought they were going to do pretty well as well. 40 points in Ontario, not bad. They outperformed it, and look at where it came from. Pretty well everywhere else, and it all seemed to go straight to the Conservatives. Let's go to the rural part of Ontario. Underperformance by the Liberals by 6 points, 9 points overperformance. That's almost a direct swap right there. PPC, we gave them 4 points there in the rural Ontario area, and they didn't get it. And then if we're thinking about that 905 area, or pardon me, the kind of the middle, the most urban part of the city, where we do see that fortress, that red fortress surrounded by really blue. Well, this is what it looks like, isn't it? We thought they would do well. They did extraordinarily well if you're the Liberals, but it wasn't enough. The Conservatives didn't do quite so well. The NDP collapsed, but guess what? The Conservatives still did pretty well, and it was at the expense of the NDP. So we really are seeing that two-way race just teeter, totter, and turn into seats for who knows who. Well, we now know.
On the last part of the question, how does this juxtapose against the recent provincial election? I think after a few interviews last night, we were all kind of wondering the same question as well. And actually, like a pure vote total, I think the federal Conservatives got about 1 million more votes. So I know that was a disappointment in the O'Toole years. Somebody that spent a lot of time in the GTA. He was a GTA member himself, looking to make inroads. That didn't happen. Pierre did here, and I think not without some kind of help or lack thereof from their provincial cousins, but I think outperformed from a sheer vote total. And I think that's gonna help him in caucus discussions and whatever other discussions with colleagues may happen.
Yeah, it's going to be fascinating to watch that for sure, Rick. Here's a good question from Phil Cochran. As we look at the results, seat totals are not the whole story. Sorry, Brennan, but we love your seat totals. However, what should we take as the Liberals' actual mandate here? Randy, can you get into that one for us?
Yes. Seat totals don't tell the whole story, but at the end of the day, it's kind of really what matters from a governing point of view. And I think, Phil, that that from a mandate point of view, they won by whatever it was, 1.5, 2 points on a popular vote. The Liberals did. You would assume that's not a strong mandate, but the reality is, in our system, it's all about seats. I think that their view, the Liberal view today, will be that they would have liked 4 more. That would be a stronger mandate, but they will feel they have a very strong mandate. They picked up seats. They have an ability to govern almost like they have a majority. You've got, as we've talked about earlier here, you've got 7 seats with the NDP without a leader, no interest in going into a campaign, I would assume. So I think that you can assume that the mandate will be exercised like it was a majority.
Leila, let me bring you in to this discussion too, because as I was just mentioning, the Bloc Québécois leader, François Blanchet, is the only leader of the opposition who won their seat. We know Jagmeet Singh resigned on stage last night, a very touching moment for him and his family. What happens now in your mind? And I know it's the day after, we're all kind of guessing here. Who will lead this party? Or is there anybody that stands out to you?
Yeah, Hannah, it's a really excellent question. And I was at the NDP campaign party last night here in Victoria. It was the South Island candidates were there. And this question that you just asked was one that was very live in the room. And I'll be honest, no one has an answer. Someone jokingly suggested that I run for the leader, which I want to assure everyone I will most certainly not be doing. But I think that kind of remark really gets to a very existential question that the NDP is facing. Who is their next leader? What region of the country are they going to come from? And how are they going to bring together a coalition of people in a way that they were simply not able to do in this election? I will say, from a very rumory perspective, there are a couple of names that I think folks have been thinking through. Rachel Notley is one that people have speculated could be a possibility.
That's an interesting one.
Yes, certainly. I know as well there are some in the party who would love to see Wab Kinew, current premier of Manitoba, put his name forward. So there are a couple of names I think that people would be interested in, but sometimes the party's choice is not the choice of that person whose name is being put forward. So we'll see.
Now, Brendan, I'm going to get to you in just a second on the profile of the Liberal voter. But Rick, I want to ask you this first, because as the official opposition leader, you have to have a seat in the House of Commons in order to be that official opposition leader. Do you see Mr. Poilievre, handing that job to someone else? And again, I know this is all very new for everybody, handing it to someone else so that he travels the road. I've heard all kinds of things, and we are only a few hours out of the election campaign. What are you thinking?
My guess would be no, and more because if you listened to a lot of his rhetoric throughout the campaign, he spent a lot of time building up his own personal brand, talking about himself, his family, his story. Whereas I think in the Harper years, he focused a lot on the team, focused a lot on the movement. So I think it's a very kind of purposeful move, and I feel like he'd be letting go of a lot of that to hand it over to somebody else in the House of Commons. I think probably the most realistic move that he has left is to maybe look back to his old stomping grounds in Calgary, to a safe seat out there. And is there somebody there that'd be willing to step aside so that he can win in a by-election? But I mean, even that comes with a whole host of issues. Probably not a super popular move for people in certain ridings in Calgary who normally very, very conservative minded, probably don't love the optics of a, multi-million-dollar campaign so that somebody can get a seat in the House of Commons. So, there's no easy answer, but I have to imagine he's going to look to regain a seat somewhere.
All interesting stuff. Okay, Brenden, back to you. Give us the profile of the Liberal voter, and I know you've been digging into that.
Yeah, and this kind of relates to a couple of the points that we've already been talking about. One is with regard to kind of cross-country support and how that looks. And then there's, I think about mandate in a couple of possible ways. One is, legitimacy. So how many seats, how many votes? But another one too, what's the mandate on issues? So what we have here is the total population distribution of these things across Canada. And then you can compare about how the Liberal vote distribution works based on our polling results just in the dying days prior to the election itself. So you can see there's, to be expected. Alberta makes up 11-ish% of the actual population. 8% of the vote share came from there. And, nothing too surprising, but nothing too stark either. Likewise, and this is a little bit to what Rick was saying, you might have expected this younger group to break towards the Liberals more reliably. They didn't. They're on par, maybe even a tiny bit down. And then if you take a look at the top issue here for Liberal supporters, number one, 34% of people. So this was an open-ended question. People could have said whatever they wanted, and then we went and we theme coded them all. And 34% top concern for Liberal voters, U.S.-Canada relations and tariff concerns, with economic concerns and cost of living coming on next. Well, let's think about the Conservative voters then. Same exact thing. Look, 42% economic concerns, and just look at how far back U.S.-Canada relations and tariff concerns are for the people who are there for Conservatives. Again, to Rick, look at that 1 point. Where did it go? It didn't go to the NDP necessarily for the 18 to 34s. It went to that. It went to the Conservatives. Look at how this Quebec worked. There's an over-distribution or an under-distribution of Conservatives comparatively to the population. And then if we just take a peek at the NDP here too, fewer of them kind of by definition, but they look a little bit more, frankly, like the Conservatives, with this economic concerns being really way top, and that U.S.-Canada relations and tariff concerns being a little bit further down the list. Still second place, but a little bit down the list. So if you think about yourself being Mark Carney, the one thing that can really works across the board is economic concerns and cost of living. Everyone could agree with that. Perhaps they have different explanations for how to bring it about. Maybe that's where the tariffs thing comes in, but I think that's the mandate is to address that.
So let's go around each of you after seeing what Brenden just showed you there. Randy, what did you pick out of that information for how we might see Mark Carney, govern right away?
I think that I'm quite frankly, I'm fascinated by there's always this sort of assumption made to Brendan's point that, the young voters are voting Liberal NDP, and that is changing as it did change through this campaign, and it would appear that it may keep changing. If you are the Liberal Party, you've got to give that demographic the confidence that you understand their issues, which are cost of living, it's housing, it's all of those things. And at the end of the day, the U.S. situation will probably, who knows where it's going to go. But does it come down as a concern for Canadians? If you assume that through negotiations that happens, I think if you're Mark Carney, you need to govern in a way that you can attract back a lot of that vote that has gone to the Conservatives from young people, because they just think that's what's best for them.
Rick, what were your thoughts on those? What you saw Brenden show there?
Yeah, I mean, I'm thinking the same thing for the last 5 weeks. Is just, where did the boomers go? It's I think Pierre's message set really hit to younger people, and if not younger people, then people who may have just experienced purchasing a home for the first time, or living in an urban center and experiencing crime a little bit differently. The experience in Canada is very different for boomers who are trying to maybe retain their property that they acquired years ago, or thinking about their pensions, or thinking about retirement. They clearly found a home in the Liberal Party. So I think we all saw the awkward commercials coming from the Conservative side. Spent a lot of time seeing pictures of Stephen Harper, who performed very well with the Boomers during his 4 elections. So I think that'll be a big challenge. How does he kind of keep up the momentum of that message set that I think really resonated with younger Canadians, while making inroads in an area that he should be, or the Conservative Party should be, very popular in.
And Leila, dig into what Brenden had to show us there too. And just a reminder to those who are watching, I'm getting to your questions too. So some really great questions there. If you have more, please throw them in. Enter your questions in the comments. Leila.
Yeah, thanks, Hannah. What I really noticed, I'm bringing my BC NDP lens to the data that Brenden shared. And I think what was really fascinating was how the Conservatives under the leadership of Poilievre were very effective in really focusing on that affordability question that the NDP here felt like they had an advantage on. But as the months leading into the campaign, and then particularly through the campaign, we saw the Conservatives really just dominate on that message in a way that really affected the NDP. And so under a new leader, and as the party begins its rebuilding efforts, they'll really need to think through how they focus their message on affordability, particularly with younger voters, in a way that they differentiate themselves from the Conservative.
Just out right now too, and Brenden, I don't know if you have anything like this. Elections Canada is reporting the highest voter turnout since the 1988 election, when it was free trade was the big issue. 67.4% of the electorate at this point cast their ballot. That's over 19 million Canadians, and the largest ever advanced polls. Brenden, did you have anything that you saw in those numbers too?
Sure, I do. Yeah. Got it. Thank you.
Just magically, he does. It's so
just
amazing.
magically, yeah. Just like magic. These are the numbers again, just from this morning, which are these numbers. So of course, we had over 99% of the polls reporting. So this is pretty close. Here's the overall turnouts. There's that 67% over 2/3 turnout, and then this is the ballots cast. So nearly 40%, 38% of those were cast advance. And you can go up and down the provinces here, and they look pretty well the same. There's Alberta, 37%. There's Atlantic, 38%. There's BC, a little higher, 43% nearly. There's Saskatoon, 37%. Ontario, 38%. Quebec, 36%, pretty well across the board. I don't know how we do this collective action thing as Canadians. How do we know we're going to do that? But somehow we do, from coast to coast. And yeah, massive turnout, lots of it advance.
Yeah, and it's
Hannah.
Yeah, go ahead on that, Randy, please.
I just want to jump in on that quickly, and Brenden won't have an answer to this. None of us will, but I have to assume that with that high voter turnout, the results being what they are, and knowing what different demographics, which way they were likely to vote, that the old adage of the young people never come out to vote is incorrect. They must have come out to vote in this go around.
What do you think of that, Brenden? Do you think that is, and I know you don't have the numbers on that
yet.
Oh, you do?
I hope they agree with what I just said, Brenden.
Well, it's not a result. It is still our polling from a few days before, but we were within 1.8 percentage points overall on accuracy. So we could take this for something at least. So what I have up now is just the folks up to before election day. So after the advance polls, before election day, those who voted. So 51% of those were Liberal, 35 Conservative. So yeah, that's why we saw that seesaw back and forth when the polls closed, and then we saw things happen and trickle in. A lot of the trickling at the beginning was not the advanced polls. It was the folks who voted in person, and then the advanced polls came later and then made a big tip. And this is how. Well, let's look. I haven't thought about it yet, but it's here. So let's think about it together. So again, this is the
This
voted
is like
advanced.
live TV, Brenden. I love it.
Yeah, hey, I watch enough TV to know how it works.
It's good.
Let's look at them. Well, I don't know. I mean, they did at the same rate. Let's, look at it here together. So again, we're looking at those who did vote. This is everybody, 51-35 Conservative, 37-40. Honestly, just looking at this, where there was about 1 point difference in this group for who really did end up voting, it's a little bit bigger of a gap. Yeah, I would say that a slightly greater proportion of younger people who are going to advance vote appear to have been the younger folks. And then, levels off 35-49, and then it just takes way off here. Once you get 50 plus, that going straight to the Liberals. Well, let's now instead filter by those who by then had not yet voted, but they said, well, actually, let's say that they had not voted, but they were quite likely to vote. Actually looks pretty much the same. So, but this is what we saw, isn't it? We saw kind of a fight, a little knife fight between the two of them kind of on election day, pretty close. This is kind of before the advanced polls came in. Add the advanced polls, brings it a little bit closer to what we were looking at. How about those who said they were not really probably all that likely to vote? So these are people who didn't say they weren't going to vote, but when they told us who they were going to vote for, we got them to rate their likelihood to do so. And these are the people who gave themselves less than 80% chance of actually voting. That broke Conservatives. I think those people actually showed up. And hey, look at this, my 18 to 34s. That's where our kind of big plurality is. Yeah, election day very well might have mattered.
Wow. And this is live. You are analyzing it as you go. Thank you for that, Brenden. That was really great. I want to get into a little bit of policy because we have some questions in there. This one comes from Heather Campbell. Climate change and the environment weren't a focus in this election. What happens now on energy and energy transition for Canada? This was a big discussion. Rick, do you want to get into that one first?
Yeah, I mean, I think Carney and his team identified very early in the campaign that the ballot question or the question around energy environment had really turned to an affordability question, and I think they could have stuck to their guns in a lot of ways, but they identified it and pivoted in a way that I think probably helped them in the end. What they do with it now that they have a stable-ish government is really the question. I think the Conservatives would love nothing more than for them to, rethink carbon pricing and all of these magical things that would support energy transitions, and I think that would probably help the Conservatives and be able to drive a bit of a wedge. But I'm not sure. I think he's been pretty principled during the campaign on his views on the industrial carbon price compared to the consumer one. I don't see him making any massive moves there, but it's certainly going to have to, just in terms of the cycle, it's certainly going to have to be a much more prominent issue when you're the government rather than running for it.
Randy, I'm sure a lot of our clients in Calgary are listening to this question. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, I agree with Rick completely. I would just only add in that the challenges, and I think Mr. Carney, based on his history and all, these are issues that matter a lot to him. The reality is, I'm thinking back to one of the slides you had up, Brenden. It's not registering as a big issue. To the extent it was a ballot box issue, to Rick's point, it was the affordability side of it, as opposed to the real environment side. So I think the playing field has changed, and how the Prime Minister Carney deals with that will be very interesting to watch, because there's certainly a constituency he needs to satisfy on that front. But overall, and correct me if I'm wrong, Brenden, but this was not in any way a ballot box issue in this campaign.
Didn't come up.
Yeah, and Leila, let me ask you on that too, because just before, in the first cabinet that Mr. Carney created, he shuffled out his former environment minister, Stephen Guilbeault. So I think whoever he puts in that position will signal potentially what their ideas are. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I think it's a really good point. And I think that we've seen a reframing of the conversation around climate action and environmentalism. And to what Randy and Rick were commenting on earlier, it really has become grounded in a different way. And it is that question about affordability. And that, I think, allows governments and opposition parties to talk about the energy transition and energy projects in a way that is about the economy and about jobs and about connecting the country. And we saw that through the campaign. And so I think the new environment minister, I suspect in the Carney cabinet, will be someone who is moderate and who will be able to balance out those pressures in the caucus.
Yeah, I think it's one of the positions we'll be watching for, as well as natural resources too. Would you agree with that?
I'm sorry. I just want to put it in behind us just to back that point up. Just one little
Sure.
data
Yeah.
point
Thanks,
here.
Brenden.
So this here, we just displayed that economic concerns and cost of living, and then that U.S.-Canada relations. What we see here across the waves of polling that we did, this line here are the percentage of people who mention that every single wave. So we're looking at the economic concerns and cost of living. Look at that, 3 and 10, pretty steady across. Let's look instead at the U.S.-Canada relations and tariff concerns. Yeah, that peaked a little bit early and it started to trail off. So this really does check out with the with what you guys are hearing on the ground.
Let's just go. Sorry.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, one kind of last thought on that is, candidate Carney is going to be very different than government Carney. I think, running on an election platform. I remember when we were in Ontario in 2018, it's great to get rid of the cap and trade system, or the carbon tax as we call it. It's quite another in the responsibility of government to create a framework of what you would do differently. And I think, not to make people as cynical as maybe I've become over the years, but I think political Mark Carney is going to be very different than businessman Mark Carney. They're going to be looking at how things test in the market, how voters react. What's politically expedient for him. So he's looking at things through a different frame of mind. His advisors are probably supporting him in that transition. So it's tough to make kind of one-to-one comparisons about how he'll act in government as to how he may have ran or how he may have ran a business.
Yeah, let's talk about that a little bit, because, typically we look at the first 100 days, we look at their priorities, what will this government follow through on? I think it's going to be a much tighter timeline than 100 days, that he's going to have to start showing some quick movement because of the volatility we have coming from the United States. Randy, what do you expect to see? And you've been behind the scenes in governments in the past. How does this all unfold now?
I think right now, first off, on the 100-day piece, I think that it would be wise for them to not entertain that, not talk about it, not get tied to what really kind of could be an artificial deadline of some kind for getting things done. I do think there's a real urgency to get moving. I think that the country is going to be watching very closely, not only to who's going to be in cabinet, and I would expect that to happen, quite frankly, potentially next week, if not early the week after. I think that there's going to be an expectation that this moves quickly. I think it was Anita earlier had asked about sort of the backroom advisors. I think that needs to be sorted out very quickly. A lot of this is, again, going back to one of the slides on the dealing with the U.S. and dealing with Trump, people are going to expect that to happen very, very quickly. But the Prime Minister has some things he needs to get in place before he can really get to that. So I think we will see that kind of transition, cabinet being appointed, key people being appointed faster than usual.
Leila, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I can speak to the work of transition from a provincial perspective, and I think that it will help the Carney team that they are the incumbent team coming in. They will ideally be able to hit the ground running in a way that they wouldn't be able to if they were a new party coming in. In the alternate universe, if it was the Conservatives coming in, there's just a slowness that happens when you're not the incumbent. And so I agree with Randy. I think that we're not in a traditional political landscapes where we can talk about 100-day plans. I think Canadians will be wanting to see action really, really quickly. And I am hopeful that this new government will be able to hit the ground running.
Rick, talk a little bit about transition too. You've seen it firsthand.
Yeah, no, I think Lila's point's spot on. Like, I think they have the added benefit of having served in a shortish government before the election, a few days, and then they have the past 10 years where they've there's still a lot of cabinet ministers that served in the Trudeau era that will be prominent figures in the Carney era. So the transition won't be as stark, but in the very helpful global update that we all received this morning, I saw that they're hoping to have a budget in place, a speech from the throne, all of that before July 1. It'll be interesting to see how many cards he actually has in the negotiation with the Americans, and how early he wants to and aggressively he wants to play them. This isn't a classic diplomatic negotiation where there's more or less a formula to it. There's a lot of theater and whatnot that will probably guide the process.
So we have about 5 minutes left. And Brenden, I want to start with you on this one before we give our final thoughts. Elections Canada still counting special ballots. We're expecting full results to be released later this afternoon, if not any minute. So at this point, we're still at 168 Liberals, 144 Conservatives, Bloc Québécois 23, NDP 7, Green 1, which is Elizabeth May, the leader. What do you expect to see change in those numbers? Because you have been doing such a great job. I'm giving you a shout out here, covering all of this throughout the election campaign, and we truly appreciated all your help. What are you watching for?
I'm watching to see if they can do one more. That's it.
Just one more, eh?
Just one more. There's really nothing close like that. Yeah, the advanced polls did pretty dramatically swing towards Liberals, but as we saw that story play out, region after region after region last night, it had a certain amount that it could do, but it couldn't do miracles. I think there are a few sub 100 vote differences that are still left to find. So maybe they get one more within striking distance. Maybe that means they need to try to convince one fewer new members or returning members to cross the floor to support them. But if I'm the Carney government right now, I'm planning on doing some collaborating.
So here's a little bit of news too. First order of business for Mark Carney, it was a call with the French president, Emmanuel Macron. Anyone want to give their reaction to that?
I think it's
Donald Trump might.
Good one, Randy. Well, it's interesting because it was one of in his 9 days of being prime minister, he visited the French president as well as the British prime minister, the king, and then went north. Maybe that is kind of setting the priorities for this government as well, expanding to new markets. Would you say, Rick? I see you nodding.
Yeah, and we're hosting the G7 this year as well. So I think there's a few things on the horizon. Macron's been very, very visible and involved in the Ukraine conversation, as well as those negotiations. So yeah, I think it picks up right where he left off.
That's right.
Yeah, he strategy to diversify.
Yeah, that's it. You know what? You're right, because it does go on to say that they would see him in Canada ahead of the G7 summit in Kananaskis this June, and that was something he wrote on social media. Okay, we have about 2 minutes left. I am going to do a quick round of final thoughts, and what do you expect to see? I'm going to say in the next couple of days, because things are so crazy. Leila, let's go with you first. And
Great,
Brenden, I'm coming to you too.
Thanks, Hannah. So I think for my closing remarks, I worked as part of a minority government here in British Columbia, and I am firmly of the belief that minority governments are actually an excellent way to govern. You see really creative policies being brought forward because the parties are forced to work together in a way that they simply aren't when they have a majority. So I am really looking forward to seeing what kind of policies the Carney government is able to advance in this minority situation, if we do, in fact, remain in a minority situation.
I love the positivity. Brenden, you're next.
I'm so interested in the NDP right now. They hold the balance of power. They don't have a leader. I don't know specifically whether they have a message. So they have a lot of work to do and a lot of pending authority to wield. So I'm watching the NDP.
Love that too. Rick Roth, you're next.
Yeah, just to kind of dovetail off that, like I think that probably gives the Liberals, you know, a good upper hand to govern as if they have a majority. In a lot of sense, they got a very disorganized party that's going to go through a leadership. They're not going to be looking to take down the government anytime soon. It would not be in their interest. So I think Carney's probably got a year, 2 years of runway to govern as if he has a majority. I remember we did the same thing in 2008 in the Harper years. I think we were in and around 140 seats and you know, governed, I wouldn't say as a moderate, probably governed as you know, as what they ran on, but just kind of used a little bit of the disoriented opposition to keep legislation moving. So I imagine we'll see something similar.
Randy, final word to you.
I'll be fast. I am looking to see in the next 2 days, but give me 2 weeks here, Hannah, on what the new cabinet looks like.
Yep.
It was a very slim cabinet. There have been some star candidates elected, you know, former provincial finance minister, chair of Hydro, another person, chair of Hydro One, among others in the country, that will be assuming that they're going into cabinet, and I would assume they're going into cabinet. So there'll have to be some changes made, changes or additions made to accommodate those kinds of folks. And I am very interested, Leila, to see if one of the 7 NDP members right now are a future Liberal cabinet minister.
Oh, so
Thank you,
many
Randy.
great.
I'll leave you with that thought.
That's a great one. You know what? I want to thank this panel for their insights. I know everybody stayed up really late last night, and we are digging into facts as they continue to develop. Lots of good insight there. Thank you, everybody, for watching as well. And of course, we have a team right across this country. If you have further questions, please reach out to us. There you have our site and I think our phone number. No, but we have our email up there. So please reach out to us. These are just a few of the very talented people we have right across this country. Global Public Affairs is coast to coast. Thank you for watching, and we will continue to give you updates as they continue to develop. Chat soon. Thanks again.
Thanks, everybody. Thank you, Hannah.